How's it going, everyone? This is Mike. I'm here to show you another section of my miscellaneous film collection, which I keep on the shelves behind me. And this is part 6. Okay, so starting off with High Plains Drifter, starring and directed by Clint Eastwood, 1973. I had never seen this before, just watched it a couple of weeks ago for the first time. Totally blown away by it. Very, very good film. I was expecting it to be a violent, bloody mess, and I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't. So, okay, Clint Eastwood. Followed by this triple feature from Something Weird Video. 3 films all about high school juvenile delinquent drama. And I love all these kinds of movies. I try to collect as many as I can. First one is High School Big Shot, followed by High School Caesar, followed by something called Date Bait, all featuring actors and actresses who were definitely much too old and too mature to be in high school. My favorite in this is High School Caesar, starring John Ashley, who was a big star at that time in films like this, all about a guy who basically runs his high school as if he were the Godfather, getting people to pay for protection and all that sort of thing, deciding which girl goes with which guy and all kinds of nonsense. And of course, it comes to a very bad end. A lot of fun. Okay, followed by, we're still in high school, folks. This is High School Confidential, 1958, directed by Jack Arnold, an old friend who made lots of science fiction films like The Creature from the Black Lagoon and The Incredible Shrinking Man. And he also did this CinemaScope classic, black and white photography, starring Russ Tamblyn, Jan Sterling, Mamie Van Doren, Jerry Lee Lewis. It also features John Drew Barrymore. Michael Landon is in it, and it's all about life in a high school where all the kids dress beautifully, but they talk like beatniks and go to some crazy sort of combination malt shop / beatnik coffee house, and they hear people recite poems. It's all crazy. Everybody's on drugs. Everybody's getting hopped up on marijuana and heroin. It's wonderful. I love it. Anything with Mamie Van Doren in it. I mean, it's a classic. You have to watch it. Okay. Next up, we have a film by David Cronenberg called A History of Violence, starring Viggo Mortensen. Also, let's see, Maria Bello, Ed Harris, William Hurt. Great film, great story, incredibly well acted by everyone concerned, especially Viggo Mortensen and Ed Harris. I don't think Cronenberg has the ability to make a film that doesn't feature several scenes of bone-crushing, ugly violence. But I guess in a film like this, it's to be expected. But this is a very, very good film. Okay? Followed by Hitchcock, starring Anthony Hopkins, Helen Mirren, Scarlett Johansson, Toni Collette. Of course, it's a biography, a film biography of Alfred Hitchcock at the time when he was making the film Psycho. It's very, very well done. And Scarlett Johansson does a very good imitation of Janet Leigh acting in that movie. Very good film. This is the first season of the very popular TV show Hoarders, which was on the A&E channel. I don't know if it's still on or not, but this is the only one that I think was released on DVD that I know of. And this stuff just fascinates me because I think that I might be a hoarder someday, a hoarder in training. But okay, so much for that. Followed by a classic film from 1938 called Holiday. Holiday, starring Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant, Edward Everett Horton, directed by George Cukor. What can I say? Just a beautiful film. I only watched this for the first time recently too. Picked this up at Big Lots for $5. And it's a classic. Just one of the best things that Katharine Hepburn ever did. Cary Grant is wonderful. And it will definitely leave a very good feeling in your heart when you watch this. Okay. Next up is a low-budget exploitation film that's not terribly well known. It's called Hollywood After Dark from the early 1960s. And it's in this package, it's being criticized by the film crew, the guys who were featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000, Mike Nelson and Kevin Murphy, and what's the other guy's name? I can't remember what his name is. Bill Corbett. And so they all make fun of this movie as it goes along, and it deserves it. The star of the film is Rue McClanahan, who of course became famous for The Golden Girls and Maude. This was when she was just starting out, I guess, and you really wouldn't know it's the same person. Very cheap and sleazy film, which doesn't have a lot to recommend it other than being made fun of by these three guys. So next up is this is from Alpha Video. It's called Hollywood on Parade, and what this is a series of old short films, kind of like newsreel features that were played in movie houses back in the 1930s, just showing some of the Hollywood people, the Hollywood actors in their normal lives, you know, just visiting people and at home and playing golf and all this sort of thing. It features all kinds of people that you would recognize from the old days. People like Jeanette MacDonald, Paulette Goddard, Charlie Chaplin, let's see, Fay Wray, George Raft, oh wow, Claudette Colbert, Jane Withers, Barbara Stanwyck, Kate Smith, just all kinds of people. Maurice Chevalier, they just Bing Crosby, they just show up, you know, in parades and things like that, doing personal appearances, and it's fascinating from a historical standpoint. Looking at old Hollywood, it's really fascinating. Okay, speaking of old Hollywood, this is an MGM film. That's really hard to see, isn't it? Called Hollywood Review, 1929. One of the first all-talking, all-singing, all-dancing films that was made when films were just converting from silence to sound. And what this was for, it actually was a review of some of the biggest stars at MGM from the 1920s, trying to show them doing sound to see if their voices would sort of translate and that they would carry their popularity over from silent films into sound films. So it features a lot of people doing these very some very creative, but usually very stilted and slightly embarrassing musical numbers. People like Joan Crawford, who was the highlight of this for me. John Gilbert, Anita Page, Billy Haynes, Jack Benny, it's Norma Shearer. I mean, it's Laurel and Hardy are in it, and Buster Keaton. It's really fascinating. Well, I got cut off. My computer keeps shutting off for no reason, so I guess I was still talking about Hollywood Review from 1929. Which is fascinating to watch, a little bit slow, and it probably goes on way too long, but it's, as a curio, it's priceless, I would say. Okay, next up, film directed by Jodie Foster called Home for the Holidays, starring, let's see, Anne Bancroft, Robert Downey Jr., and I guess the main star of the film is Holly Hunter. Actually, very well done. A lot of it's very, very funny, and it's all about people coming back to their parents' home to celebrate Thanksgiving, which of course is a time that we all just loved, didn't we? I can't do that anymore because I no longer have parents, but yeah, this is one of those things that we all go through in life, for better or for worse. But very good film, a lot of good laughs in it. Next up is a film directed by Vincent Minnelli in 1960 called Home from the Hill, starring Robert Mitchum, Eleanor Parker, George Hamilton, and George Peppard. Kind of an epic story. Mitchum plays this wealthy rancher, wealthy landowner who has a very difficult relationship with his wife, Eleanor Parker. He has two sons. One is his legitimate son with Eleanor Parker, played by George Hamilton, and an illegitimate son played by George Peppard. And of course, they all have all these secrets and clashes within the family, and it's all very good drama. And Mitchum is fantastic, of course, as usual. Next up is Don Murray as the Hoodlum Priest from 1961. This is based on a real character. The priest's name is Father Charles Dismas Clark. Okay. Now, of course, Dismas is a saint. He was the thief who was he was the good thief who died next to Jesus on one of the crosses. And this is all about a priest who was trying to do his best to help young men who are getting in and out of jail and getting in and out of trouble, and basically sacrificing all of his time in his life to save some of these guys. And it introduces Keir Dullea, or Keir, I always call him Keir Dullea. I think it's Keir Dullea, who of course later became famous for 2001: A Space Odyssey. This was his first film. He debuted as a star actor, giving a very, very good performance as one of the young guys that Don Murray is trying to help. So it's a very good film. Very good film. Next up is another double feature from Something Weird Video, based all about juvenile delinquency and drugs and all kinds of nonsense. Two films. One's called Hooked, and the other is called The Flaming Teenage. And these were made in the early 1950s, and probably have no no semblance to reality whatsoever. But the best thing about these Something Weird video packages, they're loaded with extra features. Yeah, okay, hooked. Also from Something Weird video, these are all about the crazy drug crazed psychedelic 60s. One is called the Hook Generation, and the other is called the Psychedelic Priest. Now, the Psychedelic Priest is also known by the alternate title Electric Shades of Grey. Features no actors you ever would have heard of. The Hook Generation does have at least one well-known actor, a guy named Jeremy Slate, and it's all about drug running and violence and just all kinds of crazy nonsense, but great fun. Here's a very obscure film called Hothead. Okay, I got this from Sinister Cinema. I think they're the only ones who sell it, and it's another one of these late 50s teenage juvenile delinquent troubled youth films featuring actors who are definitely too old to be teenagers. These are actors I've never heard of. Kind of an intriguing story though about a young guy who was abandoned by his father when he was a child, and is filled with anger for his father because of that. And during the course of the film, he meets a drifter who is old enough to be his father, and he at first likes this guy, but then he fixates on him as being his father, and he tries to kill him. It's a very interesting psychological story. Okay, next up is The Hours. Great movie. Oh wow, Meryl Streep, Julianne Moore, Nicole Kidman. It also features Ed Harris, Toni Collette, Claire Danes, Jeff Daniels. What can I say? I only recently watched this for the first time. It all has to do with the author Virginia Woolf, who was played in the film by Nicole Kidman, and the other two women are in different time frames. It goes back and forth from one time to another, talking about Virginia Woolf herself during her time as being a writer, and the other two women at different periods, and then the stories all intersect. It's really well done and fascinating. So, okay. Next up is a film from 1978 or 79 called House Calls, starring Glenda Jackson and Walter Matthau, also Art Carney, Richard Benjamin. I remember seeing this when it first came out. I thought it was just really funny at the time. Watched it again recently. I didn't think it had any laughs at all. It's very difficult to make Glenda Jackson seem uninteresting, but this pretty much succeeded. So I don't know if I will keep this or not in my collection. I don't know if it's worth keeping. Next up is a fantastic movie called Howl. Howl. It's kind of hard to see, isn't it? Howl. How's that? Is that better? Probably not. Okay. Bad lighting in my TV room for making videos. This is a film starring James Franco as the poet Allen Ginsberg. Now, it's beautifully done movie. Allen Ginsberg, of course, was a poet in the 1950s who became very famous as a writer and became one of the very famous, what they call the beat writers or beat poets, which of course everybody later started calling beatniks, but they just called themselves part of the beat movement. But this story is about several things at once. It's about Allen Ginsberg and his early life during the time when he was writing this poem and presenting it in coffee houses, performing it in public. And at the same time, it shows the obscenity trial, which came a couple of years after it was written and published. The man who published it, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who was the owner of the City Lights bookstore, a very famous bookstore in San Francisco, was arrested for obscenity for publishing this poem, which featured a lot of profanity and a lot of themes that many people found offensive. And it also features an extended interview with Allen Ginsberg, played by Franco, during the time that the obscenity trial was going on. So it goes back and forth, those three kind of segments. Whenever the film shows Allen Ginsberg composing the poem or performing it, those scenes are in black and white. And most of the time, they usually segue into these beautiful color animated sequences, which are sometimes very dark and very frightening, which are illustrating what the poem is saying, what the poem is trying to say to people who hear it. And it's fascinating. And there are a lot of actors who are featured in it. Let's see. I need some light. I'm not getting very much here. Um, David Strathern. Uh, let's see. Mary Stuart Masterson. Treat Williams playing parts of the actual trial. So anyway, it's a beautiful film. Okay. Next up we have, let's see. Who do we have? Okay. Going to a completely other spectrum, we have How to Stuff a Wild Bikini. Okay, from 1965. This is basically the last of the original Beach Party films with Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello. In this one, Annette is top billed. Frankie is in the film, but he's not given any billing at all. Features Dwayne Hickman, Mickey Rooney, Buster Keaton, John Ashley, Jodie McCrea, Brian Donlevy, and it's probably about as silly as all of them ever get. And most of the music is not really very good. The whole thing was getting pretty tired by this time, but for people like me, they are still fun to watch. Annette Funicello was 5 months pregnant at the time, so of course she was not wearing a bikini, nor was she wearing a bathing suit. Thank God. Okay, next up is Paul Newman, starring in HUD, 1963. Great dramatic film, also starring Patricia Neal, Melvin Douglas, Brandon DeWitt, directed by Martin Ritt. Just a fantastic movie, one of the films that kind of secured Paul Newman as being a great actor of all time. Okay, next up is the John Cassavetes films Husbands from 1971. He directed it, and he also wrote it, and he also acted in it, along with Peter Falk and Ben Gazzara. This is probably one of the most self-indulgent and difficult to watch of all of Cassavetes' films that he directed. I can only say that as much as I was impressed by the film, it was actually, some of it was so almost embarrassing, the way people were doing and what they were seeing in this film. It was just, it just gave you an uncomfortable feeling, and I guess that's what Cassavetes was trying to do. It's all about these three men. It starts out with them all attending a funeral of another friend who has died unexpectedly, and they're all the same age, and these guys immediately go into the midlife crisis of all eternity, and they just start freaking out, drinking, chasing women, and they end up getting on a plane and flying to London for no particular reason other than they think they're getting away from their lives. And of course, when they get there, all they do is get drunk and chase women. So it's a very strange film. As I said, very, very self-indulgent, which, knowing Cassavetes, that's not saying very much, is it? Okay. Next up is The Ice Storm, directed by Ang Lee. Great film starring Kevin Kline, Joan Allen, Sigourney Weaver, also Christina Ricci, Tobey Maguire, and let's see, the guy Elijah Wood. Very good drama about a couple of families whose lives are intersecting during the time of an ice storm. Okay, very good film. Next up is a double feature, a couple of thrillers. One is called Identity. The other is called Secret Window. Identity stars John Cusack, Ray Liotta, Amanda Peet. Fascinating thriller. I was totally surprised by what went on in this film. It was one of the best written stories that I've encountered in a long time. Very well acted and very well filmed, and it kept changing directions. I thought I was understanding what was going to happen, and then it would take a complete turn and go somewhere else. Really fascinating. And Secret Window is also a very good film. Not quite as ingenious, in my opinion, as Identity, but very, very well done. Very creepy story. Johnny Depp plays a writer who one day is greeted at his front door by John Turturro, who he doesn't know, and John Turturro is accusing this writer of stealing one of his stories, and he's threatening to get revenge. And then all sorts of creepy things start to happen. And the actress who's in it is also, Maria Bello. Okay. All right. Very good film. Very good double feature. Next up is a film from another era, the early 1960s, If a Man Answers, starring Sandra Dee, Bobby Darin, Stephanie Powers, Cesar Romero, reflecting the kind of relationships between men and women that simply do not exist anymore, but they did like this in the 1960s. the early 60s, before the big sexual revolution and everybody just started going crazy. But Sandra Dee is gorgeous, perfectly groomed in every scene, and these two get married without really knowing each other, and then they start trying to manipulate each other. And it's supposed to be funny. It really isn't, but it's kind of a fun curio from that era, just to see what they're all wearing, if nothing else. Okay, next up, Peter Sellers, I Love You, Alice B. Toklas, from 1968. Peter Sellers, let's see, Lee Taylor Young, Joe Van Fleet. This is psychedelic 60s. He plays a very straight businessman who takes drugs and just freaks out and decides to have a totally different kind of life other than what he was destined for, which is a very kind of a straight standard life with marriage and all that sort of thing. And it's interesting. Peter Sellers is always fun to watch. Okay. Next up is from 1944. This is a film called I'll Be Seeing You, produced by David O. Selznick, starring Ginger Rogers, Joseph Cotten, and Shirley Temple. It's a film about Ginger Rogers plays a woman who is in prison, who has been given a little time off for good behavior to go and visit her family, but then she has to go back and finish her prison sentence. And while she's there, she meets this soldier who just came home from the war, played by Joseph Cotten, and they start to fall in love, and she's afraid to tell him exactly what the truth about her life is. And it's kind of a good little drama. Okay. Next up is a film all about Bob Dylan. It's called I'm Not There. Fascinating film about different phases of Bob Dylan's life and career, all the way from when he was starting out till pretty much the present day. And each one of these Bob Dylans is played by a different actor. And in the case of Cate Blanchett, actress. Okay, also Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, Richard Gere. They are all Bob Dylan at different times in his life. Lots of music, and it's a fascinating idea, done very well, I would say. And at the end, you actually see the real Bob Dylan in concert, and it's probably the most. It is so moving just to see him in reality and hear him. It actually brought tears to my eyes. Okay. Next up is a double feature, the film Imitation of Life, the first version, which came out in 1934. Starring Claudia Colbert and Louise Beavers, and the second film, which came out in 1959, starring Lana Turner and Sandra Dee, John Gavin, and Juanita Moore, Susan Kohner, which is, well, they're both very different, but they're very famous for their own way, the way it was interpreted. Based on a novel by Fannie Hurst about a white woman and a black woman who go into business together, and they're both raising daughters alone as single mothers, and what happens to these daughters and what happens to these two women in their lives. And the second version is directed by Douglas Sirk. This is really a nice package, and a lot of people object to these films because of the way the black characters are portrayed, but it tends to reflect the truth of what racism was in the 1930s and still was in the 1950s. So I love them both. I think they're fascinating. Okay. Next up is a documentary called I Need That Record: The Death or Possible Survival of the Independent Record Store. This was made several years ago, but the people who collect records and actual LPs, which I happen to be one, and the whole thing is in a revival now, and this kind of reflects. While it's interesting because while the record stores are closing one by one, and there aren't that many left in the United States or in the world anymore, the sales of vinyl LPs continue to go up. So it's kind of a strange dichotomy. But it interviews a lot of people who either owned or worked in some of those stores, and how they feel about the change in musical taste and the way music is being delivered, the rise of digital music, and the death of CDs and all that sort of thing. Really interesting if you like pop culture and if you are somebody who collects records. Okay. Next up is a great comedy called In and Out, starring Kevin Kline, Tom Selleck, Matt Dillon, Joan Cusack, Debbie Reynolds. This is a great film. Kevin Kline plays a small town Indiana high school teacher who is engaged to marry his longtime sweetheart, Joan Cusack, who is also a teacher. And one of their former students happens to be played by Matt Dillon, who on the night that he wins the Academy Award for Best Actor, and everybody in town is watching, he thanks his teacher, played by Kevin Kline, for being his inspiration, and he also says that his teacher was gay. The reason he says this is because the character he plays in the film, Matt Dillon, in the film within a film, was a gay soldier. So he thanks Kevin Kline for being his inspiration and outs him to the entire world. And Kevin Kline was a little surprised himself because he didn't even realize he was gay. But it gets very funny and very crazy, and it's all treated very well. Very, very positive film. I remember seeing this at the show with a big crowd of people, and everybody was enjoying it thoroughly, and nobody seemed to be offended by what was going on. That was interesting. Next up is a film that I absolutely love, and it's in this thin pack that I got. It's kind of a bootleg version that somebody recorded off of television. I bought it online. The film is called The Incident from 1967. Okay, The Incident, 1967. Which was a low-budget film that seemed to come and go very quickly. I remember seeing it when in the theater in 1967 and just absolutely loved it. Stars Martin Sheen, Tony Musante, has people like Gary Merrill, Beau Bridges, Donna Mills in her very first film. Let's see, Jan Sterling, Ed McMahon. It's about a couple of overgrown juvenile delinquents in New York, played by Martin Sheen and Tony Musante. This is Martin Sheen's first film, and they are drunk and crazy on a very late night in New York, and they get on a subway and proceed to terrorize everybody who is on that subway car. And a lot of violence, a lot of offensive language, but it's very true to life with the way things were in the big city during that time. And every one of the characters on this subway, they're exposed not only to themselves but to the other people, and they're all forced to look at each other in a situation where most of the time people just keep their heads down and they ignore everyone around them and what somebody else might be going through. These people are forced to look at each other probably for the first time in their lives, and also they learn something about themselves. It's a fascinating film, and I intend to do a longer video of this, be one of my films for each year of my life, okay, eventually. Very good film. Next up is In Like Flint, starring James Coburn as the character, what is his Flint. What is Flint's first name? I can't remember. It's not really that fascinating. Something that reflects the 1960s sensibilities, and it's probably good to watch once. Okay, I like the package though. Next up is an early sound film for Gloria Swanson, 1931 or 32. It's called Indiscreet, and she didn't make that many sound films. She started out being very successful in 1929 with a film called The Trespasser, but her sound career only lasted a few years. But it's a definite curio, and you get to hear her sing, so that's kind of fun. Next up is a great film from 1935 called The Informer, and it stars Victor McLaglen, Heather Angel, Preston Foster, Margot Graham, Wallace Ford, Una O'Connor, directed by John Ford. Now, John Ford won Best Director for this film. Victor McLaglen won Best Actor. And I was totally blindsided by this. I didn't know anything about it, but it's a beautifully made art film all about this man in Ireland, in British-occupied Ireland, who turns in one of his friends to the British police, and the man ends up being killed. And he did this just because he wants money, and then he lives to regret it. And yeah, very, very fascinating film, very beautiful to watch, very sad. And I'm going to cut this video off now because it's getting a little bit long. So I will do another part to this because I don't want to keep you, well, staring at this video forever. So I'll be back later with the rest of it. Thanks for watching.